So this time, we are going to talk about processes of thought and consciousness. So last time we talked about perception. This time This time we're talking about thought. Woo! Also, I need to not touch this desk at all, because it wobbles. Okay. So thought. Not all thinking is conscious, as we've covered in the Freud unit. Here we're going to just talk about more of it. It is possible to have thoughts you don't know about. These thoughts determine many, if not all, actions. Also, let's back up a second. You may notice that I did this one horizontal. This slide. I did that because of the perception slides. In this module, there's lots, or this PowerPoint has a lot more horizontal because of those early slides. But yeah, so thought determines many, but not all of our actions, because not all thinking is conscious. Now, let's get a definition of consciousness. There's lots of them, but this is the one that we're going to use. It's whatever the individual has in mind at the moment. So it's whatever your thought is, like right now. Right now. Yeah, that's the consciousness. And you can kind of translate this into memory by thinking of it like short-term memory, which is where the consciousness is located. And your short-term memory has a limited capacity, as we have witnessed with my inability to identify or bring the word to mind of a stand for this guy, but for the camera. Yeah, so it is limited. On average, it's about 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. And these chunks are just pieces of information that can be thought of as a unit. What a chunk is can vary with learning and experience. So, and also how specific you want it to be. So one way to and this is how a lot of people this is how many folks memorize large numbers of pi, is they create not just each individual digit, like 3.14159. Yeah, that's how far I get. I get to 6. Because I don't break them into bigger chunks. You could have it be 3, 14, and the rest. I'm not going to, I did not prep for this improv piece. But yeah, so you can break up different chunks, and those chunks can vary as a function of learning and experience, and use that strategy to help you remember stuff. Use that psych training. And this is one place where it's useful. Alright, consciousness. So, short-term memory and thinking. We just talked about that. But, so, how this relates to consciousness is it's a person's unique set of constructs or chunks influences how they think about the world. And you can argue that the purpose of education is by learning how all the small little pieces of information form into larger concepts. It's probably one of the only ways to really expand your ability to think, by teaching you how stuff fits together. This is why for the neuroscience brain unit, I really emphasize putting all that brain stuff in the Big Five framework to help you organize all that information, because otherwise it just feels like a disparate thing of trivia, or at least that's been my experience. Also, fun fact, education might be at least I've seen the behavior genetic work on this, might be one of the few places where you could actually gain IQ points, that innate cognitive ability. You can actually get meaningfully gain points of IQ. So if you have clones of yourself and one goes to college and one drops out of kindergarten, the one that goes to college is gonna have more IQ points because of that education. Not a ton of them, but So yeah, okay, let's keep going. So so consciousness does link itself with psychological help. does link itself with psychological health. Because one idea is that you don't want to fill up that kind of finite amount of resource with negative things. The book frames it as wrong things. So negative thoughts, worries, etc., things like that. So one reason why neuroticism might have on average tend to have lower life expectancies could possibly be because they have this buildup of negative thoughts. I would like to emphasize this is a possibility. It's not a guarantee. And instead, one way to reframe it is to use consciousness to appreciate the good things in life and use it for productive, constructive planning. So, the big key elements of the consciousness are and this is the key aspect of thinking in general, is constructs, chunks, and consciousness. So, you can think about thinking as the constructs or chunks, and those make up your distinctive view of the world, and because people have different constructs and chunks. And this is another reason why people think differently, because those chunks can be influenced by culture. I've got lots of show notes on here because there's lots going on. Okay, and from a psychoanalytic framework, consciousness or short-term memory is probably the only part of the mind with a limited capacity, which is actually consistent with psychoanalytic thought, where both the subconscious and unconscious both are unlimited, but that think about the iceberg. The water parts are all unlimited in size versus the little bit above it, the floating above the surface iceberg is there's a finite amount. Okay, come on, next slide. Come on, computer, please be kind to me. Yep. Okay. So unconscious thoughts. So we've got some cool psych studies. Again, check out the book for way more specifics. But people can do things without knowing why, or know things without knowing how they know. I definitely have a lot of weird trivia knowledge that I cannot attribute the source to, and I do my best to highlight that I'm not sure where this knowledge came from, but here's what I know. I try and identify where that thing is. And also, people can do things without knowing why. For example, I left my jacket and my entire travel kit bag for recording in my office. Maybe unconsciously, I wanted to enjoy my weekend and not record it over the weekend. While that's one way to interpret it. In reality, I'm just super absent-minded in general, and this is very consistent with me. I would move the camera over and show you, but I worry that if I do that, I'll knock something over. And I don't want to knock anything over. Because this is a white jacket. Okay, let's back up. So, the unconscious is really important. I wouldn't be talking about it. I wouldn't dedicate modules to it if I didn't. Or if it wasn't. So, because we can do many, many things without thinking or awareness. And, consciousness is a really tiny, tiny little sliver of all of our thoughts. And, it's small. That consciousness is super small. And life is way more complicated than that. We do a ton of things without thinking about it, like digestion, eye pupil dilation or contraction, all that. Now, there's some stuff that's I like to use as examples of subconscious, so that intermediary, breathing. You have control over your breathing, and now that I've mentioned it, you're probably thinking, oh, now you have to consciously breathe. Eventually it'll go back to dip below the surface. You don't have to think about it. And you'll still do it, because otherwise we'd all suffocate. So, because there's just so much more going on mentally than the consciousness can contain. 7 plus or minus 2. It's not a lot of things. And just for an empirical example, like people show preferences for objects that they've only seen at the unconscious level. So these are like stimuli that are presented too quickly for people to be consciously aware of them. Like, your brain barely processes it. But, it doesn't make it any deeper. It's a thing. Okay. So, just to remind you, that, this source here, I've learned a lot about fair use. Here's a nice illustration. The preconscious consists of anything that could be potentially brought to the surface. This is a kind of a refresher. The conscious mind contains all the thoughts and memories of what we're aware of in any given moment, and the unconscious mind is a reservoir. It's a giant bucket of feelings, thoughts, and urges that are outside our consciousness, and it is unlimited in size. It is an unlimited bucket. Wow. My speech therapist would be very disappointed in me. Reservoir. R's are hard. Most words are hard. But those are relatively hard. Okay. Yeah. Also, check out this Simply Psychology page because it's helpful. Okay, next time we're going to talk about ways of thinking. Cool. So I'll see you there. And I'm not going to do any leaning to the left. I'm just going to cut. Just a nice transition.